With me in studio to discuss all of these latest developments is Daniel Pomerantz, CEO of Reality Check, as well as a legal expert and political analyst.
Like most people, I heard about this ceasefire from inside a bomb shelter. There's a certain irony in that. And we're concerned here because if this isn't we're not concerned that the war might continue. That's the irony of Israelis. We're concerned that we might be left with this regime, which the Iranian regime, it's like the sinus infection, that if you take half the antibiotics, you feel better, but then it comes right back a little bit later. This is an ideology of the Shiite Islamic Revolution that believes in converting the world to Shiite Islam. It's globalize the revolution, just like globalize the Intifada. Their goal is not prosperity. It's not to live life well. It's not a better future for their children. And it's not even to stay in power. People keep saying what the regime wants is to stay in power. What the regime wants is to convert the world or to die trying, martyrdom, which means that if they have any ability to keep trying at all, regardless of the risks or the deterrence, they will keep making those attempts. And Israel is concerned both that they'll keep trying and that they'll keep trying in a world or with an American president that is more willing to let them try and more concerned about actually taking the effort to stop them. So that's what's on the Israeli people's minds right now. But the good news is, I don't know if I want to call this good news, but Iran's 10-point plan that they're presenting for what they would need to have a ceasefire includes a number of things that the United States simply can't agree to, like removing all American bases from the Middle East, allowing Iran to continue enriching uranium. Another one is what they call regional peace, which is code for allowing both Hezbollah and Hamas to continue operating, something Israel would never agree to. So it's entirely possible that this ceasefire could result in Iran breaching, which increases America and Israel's credibility to continue.
Daniel, all the while, even today, we're hearing many in the international community urging Israel to stop firing at Hezbollah in Lebanon. They're trying to tie this ceasefire to the ceasefire in Iran, especially if Israel does try to build this security zone, this buffer zone south of the Litani River. This is when we hear a lot of the critics saying that's not allowed. That's occupation in southern Lebanon. But how far is that from the legal truth?
Well, you know what else isn't allowed? Terror organizations. When international law, modern international law was really developed in the 1940s, before anyone had an idea that terror organizations would proliferate so much. Now there's some 230 terror organizations in the world. That's more than the number of countries in the world. The world is mostly terror organizations. They haven't signed the international conventions and they don't follow their rules. And there are many nation states that support them. So everybody who's talking about international law, who claims to care about it, has a responsibility to make these terror organizations cease existing. And for 80 years since the 1940s, they've failed and refused to do that. Now, I don't see the point in Israel sitting down to discuss anything with Lebanon because Israel isn't in a fight with Lebanon. Israel's in a fight with Hezbollah, and Lebanon has no control over Hezbollah. Now, I've heard French officials saying that, well, Lebanon, the government of Lebanon has to be careful because if they take action, they could be involved in a civil war. Well, they already are. They're just choosing to not fight it. Right now, Lebanon has a choice. Either fight for the continued existence of its country or effectively surrender their country to Hezbollah. And now I realize that the French are the world's leading experts at surrendering, but it didn't serve them well in the past, and it's not serving Lebanon well right now. International law regarding Israel creating a security zone inside of Lebanon, as long as that zone is being used to attack Israel, Israel has complete right under the Geneva Conventions to take that zone, as long as they don't intentionally target civilians, as long as they make an effort to avoid undue harm to civilians under the circumstances. They have every right to take that zone because that prevents harm to Israeli civilians. Israeli leadership was very quick to say that they welcome the ceasefire and they agree to it. And of course, that it doesn't include Lebanon, which is at odds with what Iran and Pakistan are saying. So there's a gap there, which makes me think that there's some understanding at the leadership level of where this is going, that the leadership is apparently comfortable with. But something to consider, at some point, this is going to end. And when we think about regime change, and from an Israeli perspective, as long as the current regime in Iran is still there, it's still a danger. But when we think of regime change, we think of two examples. One is World War II, unconditional surrender, Germany and Japan, success. The other is Afghanistan, Iraq, forever wars, failure. But there's another model, which is Kosovo. In Kosovo, Slobodan Milosevic was still in power after a 78-day air campaign. But then 16 months later, his regime was so weak that it finally fell to inside forces. So it could be that this will end with a successful regime change. It could be that it will end in failure, but it could also be that it will end with nothing happening, but then sometime later, the regime collapses from the inside.
I want to talk to you about what we're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz right now, because even reporting that Iran states that if the Strait of Hormuz is to be open, it wants itself and Oman to start charging transit tolls for any ships that want to pass through. How legal is this? Would these shipping companies actually have to comply with Iran?
Well, you know, there's always a difference between law and reality, something I always tell my students and used to tell my clients. Under the law, there are a whole series of different laws, international treaties and conventions that prohibit charging tolls, prohibit limiting passage. This is an international strait and ships have to go through. Iran's argument is that there's one of those treaties that they didn't sign, but there are other treaties that Iran did sign that have the same requirements. So if you're going to make the argument about international law, no, Iran is violating international law. On the other hand, ships don't want to take that risk. Insurance companies don't want to take that risk. And the biggest problem we have right now in Iran is that it's not clear that anyone has the ability to control a ceasefire. One person could agree to something, and some Republican Guard forces could end up firing anyway. If you're an insurance company, you're not going to want to take that risk. It's not even clear whether this is truly a ceasefire that is meant to lead to a resolution or whether it's something else. You know, there's a whole large armada of U.S. assets heading into the region right now, 2 aircraft carriers, Marine Expeditionary Units, Army airborne units, and all of them are traveling overseas and have, well, most of them are traveling overseas, some by air, but the ones overseas have arrival dates expected almost exactly when this 2-week deadline ends. This is exactly what we were seeing before Operation Epic Fury began. There was all this talk, all this negotiation, and just as the USS Gerald R. Ford was getting into the Mediterranean, suddenly we saw this kinetic action begin. So it's unclear whether the United States is looking to actually resolve this or just buying itself time to position its forces, and we saw it do that just a month ago. Oil prices, when we talk about oil prices, we're talking about futures contracts. That's what the market anticipates the oil situation will be in the future. And right now, the recent events have shot oil prices way down, but they could shoot right back up in a moment's notice. So what will we see for the future? Iran has said in its 10-point plan that it wants to be able to control shipping, it wants to be able to charge tolls. If that happens, Iran will have achieved a victory that is probably worth all of the destruction that it suffered. Interestingly, one of the things that Iran suffered recently was the collapse of its central banking system that provides salaries to soldiers. Those salaries were due on March 27th. And now a lot of soldiers don't have money, they don't have food, they don't have a place to sleep, which may be partly responsible for Iran at least beginning to talk. But having the control over 20% of the world's oil, which is something they didn't have before, they had the threat, but they didn't have the control, that would be a huge victory for them. And for that reason alone, I think that's something the United States cannot afford to allow to happen.
Daniel, I want to thank you for being with us on this latest edition of I-24 News.
Thank you, Nicole.
We are going out for a break now, but